And that, I suppose, leads on to just sharing with you that I've had 27 years in mining and resources in organisations until I joined consulting. And over that period of time, I had increasingly senior HR roles, and that spanned across multiple companies, diverse commodities, different levels of asset maturity, different geographies. And I suppose what I started to learn was that I kept on seeing a lot of the same problems and challenges for organisations showing up kind of again and again. And that sparked, a lot of curiosity. And so I had, I reckon, hundreds and hundreds of conversations with employees and leaders to try and figure out how they experience work. And through that, through that listening and learning, we'd come up with different ideas to trial, within the organisation. So we'd give those a crack, and I have to say, for the most part, we ended up with change that was either unsustainable. So, for instance, the leader who was sponsoring it moved on and everything unravelled, or perhaps just overall, in the bigger scheme of things, ineffectual. So at that point, I, as a HR person, I ended up with a little bit of a career crisis and thought, gosh, what am I going to do? I'm a pretty crap HR person. Maybe I should become an engineer or something. And then thought, no, this is actually about something bigger, and had this sort of, I suppose, realisation that I'd spent all that time together partnering with some excellent leaders, trying to figure out how to make organisations, how to make people work for organisations. And that was the wrong way around. So if you flip it and instead think, wow, what would it actually be like if we put all of our focus and energy instead in trying to create environments that actually worked for people, so organisations that really made human beings thrive. And so that became kind of the burning question. What is it that's the model and the culture that really makes humans and teams of humans thrive and sort of give you everything they've got? And at this point, I probably need to point out, although I might seem it, I'm not anywhere near as warm and fuzzy as you may think. So by thrive, I mean perform for the business and grow as an individual. So that's kind of really the recipe that I was after. And so once I kind of had that revelation about flipping things around, making organisations perhaps work for people as opposed to the other way around, it was kind of a revelation like, and I can only describe it as my bad 80s spiral perm, that once it was seen, it could never be unseen again. And that became the lens, my new lens, through which I could understand some of the challenges that I was seeing in the organisation that I was in at the time. And through many conversations with my industry peers, in fact, these same sort of challenges were showing up all over the place in their organisations as well. So to give you some examples, things like leaders being really stretched with unsustainable amounts of pressure on them, and in fact actually departed from their leadership role, and leadership was something that they were doing at the end of the day when they had time, as opposed to kind of embodying being a leader. We were seeing essentially a perishing talent pool in our industry, and also high levels of turnover and employee discretion levels that have just dropped quite significantly. And also, I think, increasingly high stakes mistakes going on. And so these all became, in my mind, and in sort of plenty of research as well, just hallmarks that traditional organisations were actually starting to really stretch and become brittle under a lot of the pressures that they were facing. These organisations, the traditional sort of pyramid ones, are built more for the stable environments in which they were founded, as opposed to the ones that that organisations were confronting today. And I think if you're in doubt of that at all, then one of the test points is to just have a think about, do any one of you know an organisation, if there is one, that responded to COVID with 100% of its pre-COVID structure, systems, routines, mechanisms? I think we'll find that actually organisations needed to do more. So that's just an example, I suppose, and instead of sort of sitting in their environments and existing within them, with the fast pace of change, with digital, with all these kind of shifts, that in fact organisations were no longer sitting in ecosystems environments that they could control. They were being pushed and pulled by their environment, at the rate of knots. And that's something that we can only continue to expect. So then, with that in mind, that kind of led, I suppose, to deeper thinking about this traditional organisation that's so entrenched in our industry. And I'd like to perhaps share with you what I would call an observation of those patterns coming together that I was seeing again and again. I'd like to maybe put it forward perhaps as a corporate fairy tale of sorts. So the organisation, as I was explaining, starts to kind of stretch and become required to respond to all these different priorities. So whether they're planned, unplanned, just all the external pressure coming its way. But our organisation also has its plan. It's got all of its work that it wanted to do in the way that it has always done it. And on top of that, it's needing to now take on all these different priorities and figure out, how on earth do we do this? And so basically what you've got now is a problem with focus. So this organisation is not intentional. This organisation's got a problem with focus. It's got way too many priorities. So what do leaders do when they've got way too many priorities in these organisations? They say we've got more work, so we need more people. We need more people, so we need more layers, and sometimes both. So then you sort of start with this organisation that has lost its focus, it's lost its sense of what the priorities are, and how do we actually grapple with them. So then the next thing that happens in this kind of corporate fairy tale, I suppose chapter number 2, is that the organisation says we have to actually gain control. We've lost it. We have to become predictable and reliable again. And so the next thing that happens is all the muscles around control kick in, and these show up in terms of policies, processes, new standards, and also we try and push decisions up to the top of the apex, because really now we've just got a few number of people that have got enough of a handle on what's going on, that they're the ones that we think need to make the decisions. Okay? And so what I've observed in that is actually that those things, those controls, are at best band-aids, and at worst are actually really counterproductive. So what ends up happening is instead of decision-making getting better, decision-making actually slows down, and overall it becomes worse. The other thing that happens is communication, which is already a real challenge in an organisation where things have to kind of filter up and cascade down. It becomes really, really hard to manage. And I think worst of all, the big value disruptor, people in the organisation just turn off. They become so frustrated as living hell that they just go, I don't even know whether I can care anymore. And that's sort of really, what can happen. And a little bit more on that, the research tells us that in any one of these traditional organisations today, at best, 30% of people are actually engaged. So everyone else is basically at work. So then the next chapter in our corporate fairy tale, the thing that happens is the organisation now, with only 30% of people truly engaged, we've stopped developing people, we've stopped kind of coaching people, people are unclear about their accountabilities. So then we just basically muscle through. The organisation at this point bottlenecks. So we've got a fewer number of people just working in all those traditional ways with higher levels of work and less people there with their hands to the pump. So this is kind of like the next feature. So you've got 30% of people thereabouts with their undies on the outside, going in, muscling, driving this traditional organisation and all of its kind of now with increased policy, process, standards, controls. And I suppose you ask, well, what's everyone else doing? So what does everyone else do in that situation? And everyone else, by the way, you've got great people in there, lots of talent, lots of capability, but they end up doing one of three things. They either go on and get busy with what they think the priorities are, and often they're the priorities that are in their outdated annual objectives on which they're going to be measured. They wait to be told what to do, or they actually just hide in plain sight, because by this stage, this organisation here has completely lost sight anyway of its purpose, its priorities and its performance standards. So this is, I recognise, a pretty grim kind of corporate fairy tale, and when you think about it though, you know, fairy tales are, personally was completely scarred by the one where the little kids got let out into the forest and only ever had breadcrumbs to get home, so they can be really brutal.